They say ignorance is bliss. I used to think that was just an old saying. Now I know it's the foundation of my entire town. The cool glass of water felt heavy in my hand, reflecting the dim glow from the kitchen light. Across the counter, nestled in my palm, was the small, opalescent tablet. We called them stillness drops in Port Serenity. My parents, their voices a practiced murmur of calm, always said it was our family's New Year's Eve tradition. For as long as I could recall, every December 31st, just before midnight, we'd all take one of these little bastards, ensuring we were sound asleep when the calendar flipped. "No harm will come to you, Walter," my mother would always insist, her eyes unblinking, her smile serene and unwavering, yet somehow unsettling. But this year, that perfect, unblemished calm was going to crack. This year, Walter Mills was going to find out what the hell was going on. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint, muffled sounds of the living room television, where I knew my parents were settled, watching the countdown. My younger sister, Lily, was probably already tucked away in her room upstairs, undoubtedly lulled by her own stillness drop, dreaming whatever pleasantries the town prescribed. I checked the antique clock on the mantelpiece. 11:30 p.m., 30 minutes. 30 minutes until midnight. 30 minutes until, well, that was the whole point, wasn't it? The question that had gnawed at me for months, a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. Why did we need to be asleep? What happened at midnight that we couldn't see? I turned the pill over in my fingers. It looked harmless enough, like a polished pearl. But I'd learned not to trust appearances, especially not in Port Serenity. The town itself seemed perfectly normal, a picture postcard coastal haven with its quaint lighthouse, fishing boats bobbing in the harbor, and charming Victorian houses. But lately, I'd noticed things. Little fissures in the veneer of perfection. Like the way some adults' eyes would glaze over when New Year's Eve was mentioned, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in their voices. The strange absence of New Year's parties, no loud celebrations, no one staying up to watch the ball drop on TV. It was as if the town collectively held its breath, waiting for something to pass. When I'd brought it up to my friends, Leo had just laughed, clapping me on the shoulder with a dismissive grin. "Geez, Walt, you're paranoid. Not everything's a conspiracy. Some people just like their sleep, especially after a long year of fishing." Clara, however, with her quiet thoughtfulness, had been more receptive. "It is a little odd, I guess," she'd mused, tracing patterns on her condensation-fogged glass. "My folks are the same. Adamant we're all in bed and asleep long before midnight. Marcus, always the rationalist, ever quick with a textbook explanation, had offered, could just be a local custom. Like how some towns have weird ordinances. Maybe an old superstition about bad luck to be awake at the turn of the year. I shook my head, remembering the conversation as I stood there, pill in hand, my resolve hardening. I wasn't taking it, but I needed a plan. Something that wouldn't raise suspicion. I filled a fresh glass with water, then with a theatrical flourish, brought it and the pill into the living room. My parents looked up from the television, their faces illuminated by the flickering screen, expressions warm and loving, but laced with that familiar, almost imperceptible tension. "Ready for bed, honey?" Mom asked, her voice a little too bright. I nodded, exaggerating the motion as I popped the stillness drop into my mouth. I'd learned how to tuck pills under my tongue years ago, during that phase where I pretended to be allergic to seasonal allergy meds. A quick swig of water, a convincing gulp, and the pill was safely stashed, not swallowed. "A tabby," Dad said, a visible wave of relief washing over him. "Have a good sleep, Walter. We'll see you in the morning." I embraced them both, suppressing the surge of frustration and a strange, cold dread. Why was this necessary? Why couldn't we live like other families, like normal people? I'd asked similar questions before, of course, and they were never met with satisfaction. The subject was always swiftly changed, a smooth deflection back to mundane topics. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, I could already hear the faint, soft snores from Lily's room across the hall. Good. At least she wouldn't be an issue entering my room. I quickly spat the pill into my hand and flushed it down the toilet. I changed into my pajamas, climbed into bed, and pulled a well-worn novel from my nightstand. This wasn't the first time I'd feigned sleep, though never for New Year's. If someone checked on me, it would simply look like I'd drifted off mid-chapter, the next few minutes stretched into an eternity. I kept glancing at the clock, listening intently for any sounds from elsewhere in the house. A little before 11:50 p.m., I heard my parents' bedroom door creak shut, a quiet click. Relief, or something akin to it, washed over me. They were settled, They were in position. They were sleeping 11:55 p.m. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and fear. Fear of the unknown, yes, but overwhelmingly, a potent, almost addictive thrill. No matter what happened tonight, I would know more. I would no longer be just another placid, dreaming resident of Port Serenity 11:59 p.m. I closed my book, the words a blur, and slid off my bed, padding silently towards the window. The street below was a tableau of absolute stillness. Every house on Beacon Street was dark, windows like vacant eyes. Old Mr. Silas's bungalow, directly across from ours, was a particularly deep shadow against the faint starlight, and then I saw it. Just as the digital clock on my nightstand flipped to 12 a.m., the black sky beyond my window seemed to ripple. It shimmered like heat haze above asphalt, but it was winter, and the air was frigid. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, convinced it was an optical illusion, a trick of fatigue. But when I looked again, it was still there, growing dot it was difficult to comprehend at first. My brain struggled to process the impossible forms descending from the void. Translucent, gelatinous, they moved with a sinuous, fluid motion that defied the laws of physics, gliding downwards like immense, ethereal jellyfish. As they lowered, I could make them out more clearly. Bell-shaped bodies, pulsating with a soft, inner luminescence and long, trailing tendrils, impossibly delicate yet reaching, almost hungrily, towards the ground. I froze, breath catching in my throat, as one of the things drifted towards Mr. Silas's bungalow. Its undulating tendrils, shimmering with an inner light, brushed against his bedroom window. With growing horror, I realized they weren't just brushing. They were penetrating the glass, passing through it as if it didn't even exist. I leaned closer to my own window, pressing my cheek against the cold pane, straining to understand. The rest of the creature's body followed, flowing through the window of Mr. Silas's bungalow, a silent invasion. For a moment, nothing. My breath hitched, held captive in my chest. Then, a muffled shout, abruptly cut short. Mr. Silas's voice. I could see the abrupt motion within his bedroom, highlighted by the creature's eerie glow as it now fully occupied the room. My mind-numbing terror escalated. I saw the limp form of Mr. Silas, entangled in those glowing tendrils. His reading glasses hung askew on his face, and with dawning horror, I realized he was no longer struggling. Somehow, impossibly, the Weaver, that's what I instinctively called it, had wrapped him up, and was now in the process of dragging him out through his own bedroom window. A faint, almost imperceptible metallic clatter reached my ears as Mr. Silas's glasses slipped from his face and hit the ground below. The glowing creature effortlessly pulled him fully through the window and began to slowly drift upwards, away from the house, Mr. Silas in tow. As they lifted him, I caught one last view of his lifeless face, eyes open, mouth agape. And then they were gone, yanked upward and into the shadows, a blur of silent motion. I staggered back from the window, my legs trembling uncontrollably, barely able to keep my feet. I couldn't begin to comprehend what I'd just seen. Out of the corner of my eyes, I noted more of the things drifting lazily between the buildings, some reaching into windows, emerging moments later with struggling forms embraced in their black tendrils. A strange thrumming filled the air, a high-pitched whine that I could hear even over the ringing in my ears. I clamped my hands over them, but it made no difference. It wasn't a sound, not really. More like a feeling, a vibration that buzzed in my very bones. I don't know how long I stood there, dumbstruck in shock and fear. Minutes, hours, time had stopped. I stared at the blanket of glowing, jellyfish-like creatures in the sky, understanding dawning. Each of them had taken someone. Someone from this building. Someone from this town. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The creatures lifted en masse into the sky, and within moments, it was as if they'd never been there at all. The alien drumming sound diminished, then ceased, leaving only quiet in its wake. My mind spinning, I staggered back to my bed and collapsed onto it. What had I just seen? Where had Mr. Silas and the others been taken? Why had my parents, why had the whole town, wanted us to sleep through this? Awareness returned to me gradually, a slow, painful crawl from the abyss. I blinked my eyes open to see the dim morning light filtering through my curtains. For a moment, I simply lay there, confusion blurring the edges of memory. How had I gone from that darkened street, filled with those invading creatures, to the familiar comfort of my own bed? My heart hammered in my chest as I tried to make sense of it. It hadn't been a dream. I remembered it all too clearly, too vividly, for it to have been a nightmare. With a groan, I pushed myself up, gingerly. My head throbbed in time with my racing pulse. The house was silent, save for the faint sounds of my mother making breakfast down in the kitchen, the clatter of pans, and the gentle sizzle of bacon. The clock on my bedside table read 10:23 a.m. I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept this late. But then again, I also couldn't remember the last time I'd spent an entire night standing guard against the impossible. I set my feet on the floor, glancing over at the window. I hesitated for a brief moment, a fresh wave of dread washing over me, before moving to it and peering through the blinds. The street looked perfectly normal. Mr. Silas's house stood across the street, just as it always had. There were no signs of any incursion, no scorch marks, no broken windows, nothing to suggest the Etha Weavers had even been there. I rested my head against the cold glass, straining my eyes toward Mr. Silas's house. That's when I saw it, a faint, almost invisible iridescent residue on his bedroom window, barely perceptible in the early morning sunlight. My heart skipped a beat. It was real. It had all been real. My hands trembled as I dressed and headed downstairs, drawn by the familiar scents of coffee and bacon, and the muffled sounds of the television coming from the living room. I hesitated at the base of the stairs, taking a deep, shuddering breath before stepping into the kitchen. "Hey, sleepyhead," my mom sang, entirely too brightly, from her position at the stove where she was busy stacking pancakes on a platter. "Happy New Year." My father folded the newspaper he was reading and smiled at me. "There he is, did you sleep well?" I just looked at them, trying to find some hint of distress or discomfort in their expressions. I saw none. They were just sitting there, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened last night. As if it had been just another New Year's Eve. "Yeah," I croaked. "Fine." Lily bounded into the kitchen then, her face bright. "Are we going to the park today, Mommy? Can we go, please?" Mom chuckled at her enthusiasm. "Maybe later, Lilybug. Let's have some breakfast first, okay?" I dropped into a seat at the table, trying to process it all. How were they so nonchalant about this? How did Lily have no idea it had happened? How could they have slept through all that? As we ate, I kept waiting for someone to say something about Mr. Silas, to ask if anyone had heard anything unusual during the night. But the conversation was all innocuous. Our New Year's resolutions, everyone's plans for the day, if we should start taking down the Christmas decorations or not. When we were finished, I offered to take the garbage out to the curb, using it as an excuse to get outside. As I rolled the can to the street, I looked up and down the road. Everything seemed perfectly fine. I saw Mrs. Periwinkle walking her terrier on the sidewalk across the street. The Millers next door were loading their SUV with bags, probably headed out for some adventure or another. And there was Mr. Silas's house, directly across from mine. Before I knew it, my feet were carrying me over. My heart was racing by the time I reached his porch. I raised my hand to knock, but hesitated. What if he answered? What the hell would I say to him? But what if he didn't? I took a deep breath and knocked on the door with my fist. No answer. I tried again, a little louder. Same result. "Mr. Silas," I shouted. "Mr. Silas, it's Walter Mills. Are you home?" I leaned over the railing and tried to look in the front window, shading my eyes with my hands as I pressed my face to the glass. The interior looked neat and tidy. A coffee mug rested on the table beside an armchair in the living room, atop a small stack of magazines. Everything looked perfectly normal, like Mr. Silas was just in the other room and about to come out and greet me. But I knew otherwise. I had seen him taken. I stepped back from the house, bewildered. How could this be? How could Mr. Silas have gone missing and nobody realized it? As I turned to make my way back to my house, I almost ran into Leo, who was jogging along the sidewalk. "Hey, Walt," he said, grabbing my shoulders. "Are you all right? You're as white as a sheet." I started to say something, then shut my mouth again. What was I supposed to say? Would he even believe me? Yeah, I'm okay," I said. "Just been a long night, I guess." Leo smiled. "Yeah, those stillness drops give me the weirdest dreams whenever I take them." He paused, looking at me oddly. "Happy New Year, man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "See you tomorrow at school." I was left standing there alone as he trotted off, the bustling New Year's Day town moving obliviously around me, unaware of the horror that had occurred while they slept. Unaware that Mr. Silas was gone, taken by those impossible creatures, without a sound, without a trace, without anyone even noticing or caring. The weeks and months that followed that New Year's Eve were filled with anxiety and paranoia. I jumped at every shadow, certain that at any moment one of those glowing tendrils would burst through my window and snatch me away. Sleep was difficult to come by, and when it did, it was filled with nightmares so lucid that I often jerked awake, tangled in my sweat-soaked sheets and gasping for breath. I began falling behind in my studies, unable to focus on anything other than that fateful night and the events I'd witnessed. My mind wandered constantly back to that moment when Mr. Silas was dragged screaming through his window, and more than once I found myself drifting to the window beside my desk, half expecting them to suddenly descend upon the city from wherever they hid while the sun shined. "Mr. Mills," came the impatient shout from Mrs. Gable, my history teacher. "I was asking you a question about the American Revolution." I blinked, suddenly noticing that everyone in the class was looking at me. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?" Mrs. Gable just frowned. "I need you to stay after class, Mr. Mills." When the bell rang, I packed up my stuff as slowly as I could, knowing what was coming. Mrs. Gable sat on the corner of her desk and watched me with a concerned smile. "Walter, is everything okay at home? You've seemed a little distracted recently." I shrugged and gave her my best reassuring grin. "Yeah, everything's fine, Mrs. Gable. Just been having a little trouble sleeping, that's all," she nodded, not looking like she believed me. "Well, if you want to chat, you know where to find me." "Thanks," I said, ducking past her and nearly running into Leo in the hallway. "Hey, watch it," he said, grabbing my arm. "What's going on? You look like you're all pale, and you've got bags under your eyes like you haven't slept in days." I waved it away. "I'm okay, just feeling a little stressed over finals, I guess." Leo shook his head. "Walter, this has been going on for months. Something's been up with you for a while now." Before I could answer, Clara and Marcus stepped up beside him, wearing matching expressions. "Hey guys," said Clara quietly. "Can we talk to you for a minute, Walter?" My heart sank. I'd heard this tone before. "About what?" Marcus fidgeted with his glasses. "We're concerned about you, Walter. Ever since New Year's, you've been acting strange, distant, paranoid. We're your friends," Leo said. "We want to help." I looked at their faces, anxious and worried, and felt a twinge of guilt, but also a little irritation. I couldn't tell them what I'd seen. They'd think I was nuts. "I know and I appreciate it," I said, "but there's nothing wrong." Clara leaned forward and placed a hand on my arm. "Walter, you know that's not true. Your grades have been dropping, you've been distant, and we've noticed you watching Mr. Silas's house more than once." I winced at the reminder of Mr. Silas and that awful night. Marcus nodded. "If there's something happening, something wrong, you can trust us." I glanced around at my friends, feeling the sting of threatening tears welling up in my eyes. A big part of me wanted to tell them everything, to share the horrors I'd seen with them, but the more logical part of my mind knew better. They wouldn't believe me, they'd think I was insane. I just can't," I said. "You wouldn't understand." Leo's face darkened. "Walter, we're your best friends. Whatever it is, we can take it." I shook my head and took a step back. "I'm sorry. I need some time." I turned and started to walk away. Clara shouted after me, "We're all getting together at the library for a study group tonight. Please come, Walter. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. Just be with us." Without turning around, I gave a brief nod and then quickened my pace, leaving my friends standing there, watching me with concern. The rest of the day was a blur. By the time evening came, I felt completely drained, both mentally and emotionally. A big part of me just wanted to hide away in my room and skip the study session, but a smaller part of me wondered if it was time to take a chance and trust my friends. With a sigh, I slung my backpack over my shoulder and made my way to the library. I could hear the voices of my friends through the door of the study room as I stood outside, hand on the knob, trying to summon my nerve. I stepped inside the study room, and Leo, Clara, and Marcus all looked up from their textbooks at me, a mixture of surprise and relief on their faces. "Walter," said Clara, standing and embracing me. "We weren't sure you were going to come." I returned the hug, a lump rising in my throat. "Yeah, well, I figured it was time we had a conversation." Leo gestured to an empty chair. "We're listening." I remained standing, shifting nervously as I set my backpack on the floor at my feet. "It's about New Year's Eve," I said quietly. Marcus frowned. "What about it?" I drew a deep breath and set my jaw. "I didn't take the stillness drop that night." Leo frowned. "What? Why not?" "I needed to know what was happening," I said, my words coming faster now. "I saw Christ. You're going to think I'm insane." Clara took my hand across the table. "We're not, I swear it." I nodded. "I saw them, the creatures. They descended out of the sky like enormous, glowing jellyfish, and they took the people." Everyone was quiet now, just listening. I knew they didn't believe me, but I continued anyway, recounting everything I'd seen that night. How Mr. Silas had been snatched from his window, the unearthly vibration in the air, the way the creatures passed through solid walls as if they weren't even there. When I was done, I looked up at them, waiting for the mockery, the skepticism. But it didn't come. Instead, I saw only shocked and confused faces, and something else. Was that recognition? Holy, Liam began, his voice a whisper. I thought it was a dream. My pulse quickened. What? Marcus removed his glasses and rubbed his face. I've had dreams about something like this, of glowing tentacles coming through my window. I just thought it was my imagination. Clara nodded slowly. I awoke to some strange noise, but drifted back to sleep almost as soon as I noticed it. I looked at them both, almost disbelieving. You believe me? Leo raked his hand through his hair, visibly shaken. I know it sounds insane, but yeah, I do. Marcus frowned, always the thinker. But why? Why would our parents drug us? Why would they hide this from us? I don't know, I said, but I think it's happening to other families as well. Silence filled the room as they all absorbed what I had said. This wasn't just about our family, it was about this whole town. All of our families, Clara spoke up, her voice firm. We need to find out what's going on here. If this is affecting other families, we have to put a stop to it. Leo nodded. Yeah, but we have to be smart about it. If our parents are somehow wrapped up in this, we can't trust anyone. I agreed. Marcus opened his laptop. I'll see what I can find in the town's history, see if anything stands out that we didn't notice before. The Port Serenity Municipal Library was a place of quiet reverence, musty and smelling of old paper and dust. A hush fell over me as I approached the stacks devoted to local history, my fingers trailing along the spines of the dusty books, searching for anything that might help me understand what had been going on in our deceptively peaceful town. I grabbed a thick, leather-bound volume titled Port Serenity, a centennial history, its pages brittle and yellowed with age, and carried it over to a nearby armchair. I began leafing through the pages, scanning the text for anything that might be useful. Before I got too far, however, a hand tapped me gently on the shoulder. I looked up to see the elderly librarian, Mrs. Gable, not my history teacher, but a different Mrs. Gable, a distant relative, a woman who seemed as much a part of the library's ancient silence as the books themselves. Smiling down at me with curious eyes from behind her overly large, bifocal glasses. "Are you looking for something in particular, dear?" she asked, her voice a soft rustle of dry leaves. Sure," I said, trying to sound casual, feigning a student's innocent curiosity. "I'm doing some research on the history of the town, New Year's Eve celebrations and that sort of thing." The smile on Mrs. Gable's face faded slightly, a fleeting shadow crossing her features. Her eyes, which moments before had seemed kindly, now held a glint of something I couldn't quite decipher, a flicker of wariness, perhaps. "Oh," she said, the single word hanging in the air. "Why do you ask?" I shrugged as casually as I could. "No reason, just it seems like a pretty important thing around here. Everyone talks about it, but no one really celebrates it. Just seems quiet." She nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than comfortable. "Okay then," she said, her voice regaining its pleasant, albeit slightly strained, tone. "You let me know if there's anything I can help you with." She turned and left me there, retreating into the deeper shadows of the stacks. I got the distinct impression that she absolutely knew more than she was saying, that the question had touched a nerve she preferred remain dormant. I turned back to the research, a gnawing suspicion growing in my gut. I started with the local newspapers, old microfilms that whirred and clicked in the ancient machine. Then town records, census reports, property transfers, and as unbelievable as it seemed, a pattern began to emerge. Every few years, around the same time, usually near New Year's Eve, someone would have gone missing. Not just a random disappearance, but a specific kind. In each case, there was some sort of explanation. An accident at sea, a sudden need to travel unexpectedly to visit a sick relative, a last-minute decision to move away for a new job. Always plausible, always convenient. But in each case, I noted that they all occurred within a very narrow window of time, always around the same date, December 31st to January 1st. And always, the explanation was given by family members who seemed oddly, unnervingly serene about the departure. I scribbled notes on the paper beside me, my hand cramping, listing the names and dates I'd discovered thus far. The Albright family in 1957, the Davidsons in 1968, the Millers in 1985, the Periwinkles in 1992, and chillingly, Mr. Sila's in the present year, his fate now, in my mind, undeniably linked to this macabre pattern. In each case, the surviving family members relocated shortly afterward or simply seemed to adjust. And nobody, absolutely nobody, seemed to have noticed anything amiss in the aftermath. No protests, no police investigations beyond a cursory one. Just quiet acceptance. I was so wrapped up in my thoughts, so deep in the rabbit hole of Port Serenity's dark history, that I didn't hear Leo approach. "Find anything interesting?" he asked, his voice a low whisper. Dropping into the chair across from me, I started, my hand instinctively covering my notes. "Jesus, Leo. What are you doing?" He cocked an eyebrow, a knowing grin on his face. "Probably the same thing you are, trying to find some answers." I paused a moment then, with a sigh, slid my notebook across the table to him. "Check this out. It happens every few years all the way back." Leo's eyes grew wider as he read what I'd written, his face paling with each entry. "Jesus Christ, Walter, this is huge." "I know," I said quietly. "And it's been going on for a long time, decades at least, probably longer." We quietly conferred with each other about our findings, comparing the chilling regularity of the disappearances. The library's closing announcement echoed through the stacks, pulling us from our grim discoveries. We packed our things up and headed back out into the cool autumn afternoon, the setting sun casting long, unsettling shadows across the town. "We need to talk to Clara and Marcus about this," Leo said as we walked, his voice grim. "Perhaps we can track some of these families down and see if any of them are willing to speak to us." I agreed, an anxious excitement building in my gut again, this time tinged with a bit of dread. "Yeah, but we need to tread very carefully here. If this is as big as I'm starting to suspect it is, then the people in charge, they've kept this secret for generations." Leo gave my shoulder a reassuring grip. "We will. Together, right?" The air was chill with that particular bite that only an autumn morning can bring, and brown leaves littered the sidewalk as the four of us made our way down Maple Street, our footsteps echoing on the deserted suburban walkway. Leo, Clara, and Marcus walked alongside me, all of us with hands stuffed into jacket pockets against the cool breeze. We'd spent the last few weeks going over all the notes I'd taken at the library, cross-referencing some of the names and dates I'd made note of. Now, on the morning of the autumn equinox, we were ready to begin knocking on doors. "Just remember," I said quietly, glancing at their faces, which were etched with a mixture of apprehension and grim determination. "We're researching a school project about local history. No big deal. We're just looking for old stories, local customs." Leo nodded grimly. "Understood. Where do we start?" I consulted a wrinkled page of notes, its surface covered in my frantic scribbles. "The Millers, their daughter Sarah, went missing in '98. The faded and peeling white-painted two-story house loomed before us, its windows like blank eyes. My heart raced as I pressed the doorbell button. A moment later, the door opened, and a gray-haired woman with her hair in a tight bun eyed us cautiously. "Can I help you?" she said, her voice thin and reedy, her gaze wary. I put on my brightest, most innocent smile. "Hi, Mrs. Miller, right? We're students over at Port Serenity High, and we're doing a project on the history of the area, specifically local traditions and family histories. We were hoping to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind." "About old Port Serenity." Her frown deepened, a network of wrinkles around her mouth. "I have no interest in talking about the old days," she said, her voice suddenly flat, devoid of any warmth. "Goodbye." Before we could object, the door was closed in our faces with a soft click that resonated with finality. "Well, that went well," Marcus said dryly, adjusting his glasses. "We hit 3 more houses with the same result. A couple just slammed the door in our faces when we asked if we could come in and chat. One old guy threatened to call the sheriff if we didn't get off his porch. The afternoon was growing later, the beginnings of the sunset casting the streets in a golden, melancholic glow. "I don't think this is going to work," Clara said, crossing her arms over her chest. Her usual quiet optimism seemed to have been worn thin by the repeated rejections. "It doesn't seem like anyone is interested in talking about anything, really." I was just about to voice my concurrence when my eyes fell upon a house at the very end of the block. Unlike its neighbors, whose facades were either starkly conventional or simply faded with time, this one was a riot of color and whimsical patterns. Its walls were painted in swirling blues, purples, and greens, as if an artist's palette had exploded. Multiple wind chimes, crafted from seashells and driftwood, hung from the front porch, swaying gently in the ocean breeze, creating a faint, melodic tinkling sound. This was different. This house looked like it actively defied the quiet conformity of Port Serenity. One more, I insisted, a surge of renewed hope coursing through me, nodding towards the vibrant house. That one, the front yard was filled with various pieces of twisted metal and bleached driftwood, looking like a cross between abstract sculptures and eccentric garden gnomes. The name Elias Thorne was painted on the mailbox in a flowing, almost wild, cursive script. I rapped my knuckles on the door, which was decorated with some sort of wreath made of dried flowers and crystals, emitting a faint, earthy scent. It opened a moment later, and I was looking at a man whose eyes were startlingly bright, almost luminous, within a gaunt, deeply lined face framed by a wild mane of silver hair that seemed to defy gravity. He wore an intricately embroidered robe that seemed more suited to another century. "Well, well," he said, his voice smooth and resonant, yet with an underlying gravelly quality, as if he hadn't spoken much in a long time. "What brings four young people to an old man's doorstep on the equinox?" I blinked, momentarily nonplussed by his odd greeting. We're students, sir," I managed, stumbling over the words. "We're researching local history, and we're hoping you might be able to answer some questions about old Port Serenity." Elias Thorne regarded us silently for a long few seconds, his unsettlingly bright eyes lingering on each of our faces in turn. I almost felt like he could see through our flimsy cover story, that he was peering directly into the anxious depths of my purpose. At last, though, he nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Then he stepped back, waving us inside with a hand that trembled slightly. "Please, come in," he said, a faint, almost pitying smile playing on his lips. "I think perhaps you are interested in more than just the history of the place." "Yes." I looked over at the others and saw the same mixture of relief and apprehension mirrored there. It was almost too easy. This was the first person that seemed like they were going to talk to us. Still, there was something about the way Elias smiled knowingly that made me feel a little uncomfortable. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret, and perhaps had paid a high price for it. When we entered his house, I was surprised by the sheer amount of artwork that seemed to cover every available space. On the walls, stacked against furniture, even spilling onto the floors. Sketches, charcoal drawings, paintings vibrant with the same colors as his house, depicting abstract forms that hinted at something vast and incomprehensible. The air was thick with the scent of oil paints, aged paper, and something else, something musky and indefinable, like forgotten dreams. "This way," Elias said, ushering us further inside. "You'll have to excuse the mess. I process most of my thoughts and experiences through my art." His voice seemed to grow stronger, less gravelly, as he spoke, as if the act of speaking about his passion invigorated him. My pulse quickened. Maybe he did know something about the New Year's creatures. "Interesting," I replied, doing my best to sound calm, to maintain the facade of polite inquiry. "How long have you been in Port Serenity, sir?" Elias laughed lightly, a dry, rustling sound like the wind through autumn leaves. "Longer than most, I'd wager. I've been through more than a few turns of the seasons in this town, more turns than anyone should bear." He motioned for us to take a seat on an old, paint-stained couch, its fabric worn thin in places. He himself sat on a nearby stool, eyeing us with those unsettlingly sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Well," he said, folding his hands and resting his elbows on his knees, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Why don't you tell me what it is you're truly searching for?" I looked around at my friends, finding the same apprehension I felt mirrored on their faces. "In for a penny, in for a pound. We want to know what really goes on in Port Serenity on New Year's Eve," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper in the cluttered silence of the room. Elias grinned, a wide, almost manic smile that showed a row of stained teeth. "Okay," he said, his voice dropping to a low, thrilling murmur. "What do you know about it?" I followed Elias into what was obviously his studio, the true heart of his eccentric home. The walls were not merely covered, but entirely consumed by paintings, stacked several deep, spilling onto the floor, propped against easels. The air was thick with the unmistakable smell of oil paints, turpentine, and a pervasive, sweet, earthy scent that I now recognized as incense burning continuously, as if warding off some unseen presence. Liam, Clara, and Marcus followed me in, their eyes wide with a mixture of fascination and unease, as they took in the chaotic, vibrant space. Elias motioned us toward a few threadbare sofas and chairs, each covered in drop cloths and splatters of paint. He pulled a fresh sheet from a stack of boxes and draped it over one of the couches, shaking his head until his long silver braids swayed from side to side. "You've come to me looking for answers about New Year's Eve," he said, his voice gaining a theatrical depth, "but are you truly ready for them?" He walked over to a large easel shrouded in a dark velvet cloth. With one quick, dramatic motion, he pulled the cloth away from the canvas. I started, taking a half-step backward, a choked gasp escaping my lips. The painting was of a darkened sky, not simply black, but a deep, bruised purple, alive with the twisting and glowing shapes, not stars, not clouds, but the unmistakable, translucent forms of the ether weavers, just like the ones I'd seen that night on New Year's Eve. They writhed and pulsed with an inner, sickly light, their tendrils reaching down towards a tiny, unsuspecting town below. "You seen them," Elias said quietly, his unsettlingly bright eyes fixed on my face, reading my every reaction. I just nodded, words failing me. My throat was suddenly tight, my tongue a dry, heavy lump. Leo took a step closer, his eyes wide, his face pale, mirroring my own terror. What are they?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elias moved aside, revealing more of the smaller paintings behind the large canvas. In each, the scenes varied, but the core elements were always the same. Translucent tentacles bursting through windows, shadowy forms looming over sleeping figures, deserted streets awash in that sinister, phosphorescent light. One depicted a figure being gently, yet irrevocably, lifted into the sky, their face serene, almost blissful. "They have many names," Elias replied, touching a hand, almost reverently, to one of the canvases, "depending on who you speak to and how much they remember. The takers, the between ones, the dream harvesters. But their true name, the one whispered by the truly ancient, the one that makes the bones ache with recognition, is the ether weavers." He paused, his gaze sweeping over each of our faces, assessing our readiness. "Port Serenity has seen them before, many times over the years, always around the turn of the year." Marcus adjusted his glasses, his analytical mind clearly struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with any known reality. "But what are they? What do they want?" Elias laughed, a dry, humorless sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "What does any predator want? They want to feed." He walked over to a nearby desk that was covered in various papers and books, old maps and strange diagrams. He retrieved an ancient, leather-bound book with yellowing, brittle pages. As he thumbed through it, I could see it was filled with meticulous, spidery handwritten notes and unsettlingly precise drawings of the weavers. "Port Serenity," Elias began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "was not built on a natural harbor, but on a confluence of ley lines. Powerful energetic currents that crisscross the earth. That makes the veil thinner here, particularly on some specific nights. New Year's Eve is merely the most potent of these junctures. The original settlers, a group of survivors, refugees from something unspeakable, discovered this confluence. They made a pact with these things, a desperate bargain. They were granted protection, prosperity, a blissful, unwavering peace. And in return they provided offerings, not of blood or coin, but of consciousness." I felt sick. "The people that go missing," I murmured, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying inevitability. "The families that just up and leave," Elias shook his head, a grim frown on his face. "Not one soul per year, young Walter." "Not exactly. That's a common misconception, a comforting simplification. It's more subtle, more insidious. It is a continuous, gentle integration. The ether weavers are not external invaders. They are extensions, manifestations of the collective consciousness of this town. They are the guardians of the peace, the filters of the truth." Clara's hands trembled as she spoke, her voice thin and horrified. "That's not protection. That's a nightmare. How can they just decide that? They rationalize it as a means of preserving the town," said Elias, a sneer twisting his lips. "As a way to escape a greater, unbearable truth, and they guarantee that no one else knows anything about it. They all just sleep through it, none the wiser. The stillness drops are merely a catalyst, a ritualistic reinforcement. They ensure the deeper sleep, the blissful oblivion, the shared dream that protects them from waking." I remembered the sleeping pills, the way the whole town had basically been shuttered on New Year's Eve, the strange serenity of its people. It all fit together in a terrible, soul-shattering way. "We need to stop it," Liam said, his hands balling into fists at his sides, his face a mask of shock and grim resolve. "Be wary," Elias said, his bright eyes leveling a gaze at us, suddenly piercing and intense. "The caretakers of this peace, the elders, will go to great lengths to protect their secret. And the entities themselves, they are not limited by our physical laws. They can manipulate your dreams, your perceptions, your very memories." He slid the last painting, a smaller canvas to the front. It depicted 4 teenage versions of ourselves, enshrouded by the ominous, iridescent darkness of the Ether Weavers, their faces a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. "You've already attracted their attention by remaining awake, Walter," Elias said, his voice a low warning. "By observing, by questioning. If you continue down this path, you'll endanger all of you. The only safety is in sleep, in ignorant oblivion." I looked around at my friends' faces and saw my own sentiments echoed in their expressions. Fear, yes, but also a hardening resolve. We weren't turning back now, not after what we knew. "We can't just stand by and do nothing," I insisted, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. We had staggered out of Elia's studio into the crisp evening air, our heads spinning from all we had learned. An unspoken agreement led us to wander along the Port Serenity streets, our thoughts too chaotic to focus on any particular destination. I looked at the others, knowing the same stunned expression I wore was reflected on each of their faces. Leo's jaw was set, and his eyes had a faraway, troubled look to them. Clara had her arms crossed tightly across her chest, and I knew it wasn't from the chill. Marcus fidgeted with his glasses, a habit I'd noticed him do when he got anxious, when his logical world was turned upside down. Eventually, though it seemed like hours, though it was likely only a few minutes, we found ourselves standing in front of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, a beacon of mundane normalcy. The neon lights beckoned us with the glow of something familiar, something safe, something that felt real. I nodded towards it. "Yeah," Leo mumbled, his voice hoarse, the first thing he'd said since we'd left Elias' place. "I need some coffee." "A lot of it," we shuffled in, the little bell on the door announcing our entrance with a cheerful jingle that felt entirely out of place, given our grim new reality. The place was mostly deserted, save for a pair of grizzled fishermen at the counter nursing cups of coffee, their faces weary from an early morning catch. We grabbed a booth in the back, the red vinyl cracked and worn. A moment later, a middle-aged waitress in a faded pink uniform came over to us, her expression tired but kind. "What can I get for you, hun?" she asked, pencil poised over her notepad. We ordered 4 coffees and a basket of fries. She headed back to the kitchen, leaving us in a suffocating silence. None of us spoke, each lost in our own thoughts, the weight of Elias' revelations pressing down on us. We'd come here looking for answers, and we'd certainly gotten them. The problem now was figuring out what to do with the information. The waitress brought our coffees, the steam rising in comforting plumes. We added cream and sugar, using the warm mugs to thaw our chilled hands. I took a deep breath, inhaling the aroma of stale coffee and frying oil. "So," Marcus asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper breaking the silence. "What now? What can we possibly do?" I started to answer, but stopped myself. What could we do? We were just kids, high schoolers, standing against a town-wide, generations-long, cosmic pack. Clara pushed a fry around her plate, her eyes distant. Maybe we just forget about it. Just go back to sleep on New Year's Eve with everyone else. It sounds peaceful, doesn't it, to not know? Her voice held a note of desperate longing that startled us all. "No," Leo said, his voice erupting with a sudden vehemence that startled all of us. He slammed his fist on the table, making the coffees jump. "We can't just ignore it. People are being integrated. Whatever you call it, they're gone, and not just gone, but their families forget them. Their memories are wiped clean. But what can we do?" I asked, my voice edged with frustration and despair. "I mean, you heard Elias. These things aren't even from our reality. They're extensions of a collective dream. How do you fight a dream?" Marcus adjusted his glasses, his brow furrowed in thought. "We should learn more about it. Elias said they're extensions of the collective. If that's true, there has to be a way to disrupt that connection, to nullify the bargain or to protect people, to break the dream or at least make it lucid." We discussed it further, the ideas coming in hesitant bursts, then dying in the face of the overwhelming impossibility of it all. None of us could come up with any ideas that seemed like they'd be truly effective against what we faced. Eventually, our conversation drifted back to more mundane topics: school, movies, the upcoming winter break. Anything other than the monstrous, dream-woven secret that we now knew rested at the heart of our sleepy little town. The sky was beginning to lighten when we finally decided to leave the diner, our coffee long since cooled in our cups, the fries completely devoured. We all headed to our homes with mumbled farewells, each lost in our own thoughts, the enormity of our shared burden weighing heavily on us. A few weeks had gone by since our late-night conversation in the diner, and the gray chill of autumn had drifted into the icy freeze of early winter. Snow flurries fell around me as I made my way down the street, my hands stuffed into my coat pockets, my head down against the biting wind that blew in off the harbor. Christmas was only a few weeks away, but my thoughts weren't on the holiday. As I turned onto Lighthouse Road, I spotted the moving truck. It was parked in front of the lighthouse keeper's house, still running, with the driver standing beside the open door. The car parked in front of it seemed out of place, a sleek, modern sedan amidst the rugged, older vehicles of Port Serenity. But when I saw the family climb out of it, I began to put two and two together. People moving into the lighthouse keeper's house. That place had been empty for years, a relic of a bygone era. Most people in town avoided the place ever since the old lighthouse had been decommissioned, whispered to be haunted. A man and woman, looking to be in their late 30s, climbed out of the car and began to usher two children out of the back seat. The boy, who looked to be around 10 or 11, jumped out and immediately began looking around at all the snow, grinning broadly, his breath puffing into white clouds. The young girl, who I guessed to be around 6 or 7, took her mother's hand and followed her towards the front door of the house, her eyes wide with wonder. My gut clenched uneasily as I wondered about them. It wasn't often that we got new faces in Port Serenity, and almost never this late in the year. Something about their arrival set my teeth on edge, though I couldn't quite place why. The man caught my eye from the window, still smiling, and gave an enthusiastic wave, flashing a broad, welcoming smile. "Hi," he shouted, his voice ringing with a palpable excitement. "We're the Prestons, just moved in." I returned a forced smile and nodded, trying to infuse my voice with something approaching cheer. Welcome to Port Serenity," I said, not quite as enthusiastically. The children's voices echoed in the chill air behind me, talking excitedly about the lighthouse and their new house as I continued on my way. With a shaking hand, I fished my phone from my pocket and sent a group text to Leo, Clara, and Marcus. "Just saw the family moving into the lighthouse keeper's house. The Prestons. This has to be related." The responses came quickly, all with the same underlying concern. Ever since our conversation with Elias, we'd been diving into as much research as we could find on Port Serenity and its sordid past. We'd already seen references to the lighthouse in a handful of the old news articles we dug up, always tangentially mentioned in relation to one or more of the disappearances. Elias had explained that the lighthouse, sitting on a powerful nexus of ley lines, was a particularly potent resonance point for the dream weave, a place where the veil between the collective dream and the true, underlying reality was thinnest. It made sense that new integrations might be drawn to it or targeted there. I looked back over my shoulder. The family was beginning to pull boxes from the back of the moving truck, laughing and shouting to each other, their faces alight with the simple joy of a new beginning. A knot of cold fear settled in my stomach as it occurred to me that they had been sent here, either unknowingly or purposefully. I had a sinking feeling in my gut that the Prestons were intended to be the next to be fully integrated, to become new threads in the town's silent, collective dream. I quickened my pace as I headed back home, thoughts racing. We needed to figure out a way to warn them, to keep them safe. But how could we do that without coming off like raving lunatics? How do you tell someone their new home is a trap designed by a town-wide, generations-long psychic illusion? The hulk of the abandoned Ferris wheel towered over us, its rusted struts groaning faintly in the icy breeze. I drew my coat around me, shivering, as we made our way through the weed-choked, desolate walks of the long-defunct Port Serenity amusement park. Liam, Clara, and Marcus followed behind, huddled together against the chill, our breaths puffing into white clouds in the early winter air. We stopped near the faded and crumbling remains of the ticket booth, the paint flaking away from the dry, splintering wood frame. The place had been a ghost town for years now, decaying slowly into picturesque ruin, but there was still something oddly haunting about it in the washed-out light of the December sun. "The new family," Leo began, his voice grim. "The Prestons, they're right in the path, aren't they? The lighthouse. Elias said it's a major convergence point for the weave." I nodded, a sinking feeling in my gut. They don't know what they've gotten themselves into. Clara crossed her arms over her chest, glancing uneasily at the deserted park around us. The silence here, broken only by the mournful whine of the wind, felt heavy with forgotten laughter. "We need to find a way to warn them. We can't just let them stay there." Marcus pushed his glasses up on his nose, shaking his head. "And how do you propose we do that? It's not like we can just stroll up and say, 'Hi there, welcome to the neighborhood.' Oh, and by the way, you might be psychically absorbed by interdimensional dream entities come New Year's Eve." We have to do something, I said, my voice rising with a desperate urgency. You saw those kids, all full of energy and excited to have a new house. We can't just— I didn't want to say it aloud. I couldn't stand the thought of any of those children becoming another thread, another forgotten soul in the town's collective unconscious. Leo kicked at some dead leaves on the ground, sending them fluttering away. I don't know, maybe we can report the house to someone, tell them it's not safe for people to live there, get it condemned somehow. In a week, Marcus scoffed, shaking his head. Even if it were possible, the elders, the ones Elias talked about, they'd shut us down before we even got started. They are the ones maintaining this peace. They wouldn't allow anything to disrupt it. We all went quiet, the frustration, a heavy, tangible thing in the air around us. A stiff breeze blew in from the ocean, rattling the rusted carcasses of roller coasters and other rides around us, a skeletal symphony of decay. "What about Mr. Silas?" Clara said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was always so kind to us. Maybe, perhaps he would be willing to help. He was a newcomer like the Prestons a few years back." I thought about it. I didn't know Mr. Silas very well, other than by reputation and the few times I'd been in his hardware store. Everyone in Port Serenity said he was a nice enough guy, and he was pretty well respected, even if he wasn't one of the true elders. But he was gone. He was absorbed. "No," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. "Mr. Silas is gone. He's part of the weave now. He was absorbed. He's not going to help us because he doesn't exist anymore, not as we knew him." The chilling reality of that truth settled over us. "Then what?" Leo asked, his voice low and strained. "We have to do something. If we just warn them, they'll think we're crazy. And if they try to leave, the elders might intervene, or the weavers themselves might accelerate their integration." I looked again at the Ferris wheel as it loomed motionless over us, its colorful gondolas rocking slowly in the wind. How many people had visited this place over the decades it had existed, all the while oblivious to the cosmic horror that lay beneath their feet and threatened their very lives? "No, it's not enough to warn them," I said, my resolve building, solidifying into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. "It's not enough to save just one family, just the Prestons. We need to put an end to this, permanently." My friends looked at me, still afraid, but a new spark of determination ignited in their eyes. "How?" asked Clara, her voice shaking a bit but resolute. I shook my head. "I don't know yet, but we have Elias' information and all that we've learned. There must be a way to stop it. To shatter this dream and bring reality back to Port Serenity." Leo nodded slowly, his jaw clenching. "You're right. It's not enough to just save this one family. We have to save them all." "It won't be simple," Marcus said, ever the realist. "We have these entities, these ether weavers, and the town elders to contend with, the entire collective consciousness of Port Serenity." "I know," I said, my voice unwavering, "but we don't have a choice. If not us, then who?" We fell silent for a moment, lost in our thoughts and the gravity of what we were contemplating. The abandoned park buildings seemed to echo with our unease, the ghosts of forgotten laughter replaced by the chilling whisper of the wind through rusted metal. Clara broke the silence, her voice still shaking a bit but firm. "So, what do we do now?" I met the eyes of each of my friends, seeing the same fear and determination on each face. "Now we pool everything Elias told us, everything we've learned. We make a plan, and we prepare to confront this on New Year's Eve. We prepare to deal with these things." As we discussed our plans and considered everything we'd learned, I couldn't help but feel that we'd crossed a line somewhere along the way. It was no longer enough that we understood what was happening. We were now conspiring to alter the course of events that had plagued our town for so many decades. We were preparing for a war for reality itself. The sun had set completely by the time I reached my position, my breath steaming in the frigid air as I stood on the snow-dusted streets of Port Serenity. The few street lamps around me flickered to life as their automatic timers set them alight, casting long, fractured shadows. I looked around at the empty buildings as I waited, noting that they were oddly dark and quiet for New Year's Eve, even for Port Serenity. Every window was dark, every curtain drawn. The stillness drops had done their work. My UV flashlight was clutched tightly in my gloved hand, its beam a sickly purple against the snow. I felt the reassuring weight of the salt bags in my pockets, granular and coarse against my fingers. I moved quickly through the silent streets, the only sound the crunch of my boots on the frozen snow, reaching the open lot that contained the old lighthouse keeper's house. My heart pounded in my chest for multiple reasons: fear, anticipation, and annoying guilt. The Preston house stood directly in front of me, lights glowing warmly in the windows, a cozy beacon in the pre-midnight dark. I could make out the shapes of the family members moving about within, oblivious to the threat we knew was real, oblivious to the monstrous illusion that was their new home. My gut clenched with anxious guilt at the fact that we hadn't been able to get them to flee, to somehow convince them of the invisible danger. But we were still going to do everything we could to keep them safe. I keyed the earpiece we'd linked together, the plastic cool against my earlobe. "Walter in position." "Roger," Leo responded, his voice a low crackle. "I'm set up on the north side near the old mill." "South side clear," reported Clara. I could hear the tension, the slight tremor in her voice. "Near the docks." "West side clear," said Marcus, his voice more controlled but still tight. "I don't see anything yet from the town square." My eyes flicked around my position, straining to catch any glimpse of the ghostly things Elias had described. The only movement was the periodic bouffets of wind that drifted more snow upon us, dusting the ground with fresh, pristine white. "Remember," I said quietly into the calm, my voice firm despite the racing pulse. "We're not sure what they're going to look like to us now, or how they'll react to our methods. But if you see anything, any shimmer, any distortion, don't take any chances. Use the UV lights first, and then the salt. Ask questions later." Various acknowledgments came through my earpiece. We'd spent the better part of the last few weeks planning this, going over every inch of Elias' notes, piecing together fragments of old lore, and the few cryptic hints he offered about disrupting the weave. The UV lights, the salt, they were all educated guesses, desperate theories based on scattered whispers of ancient defenses against unseen forces, now applied to a cosmic, psychic threat. My nerves were wound as tight as a drum as I paced back and forth along the wall of the old fence, eyes watching the shadows carefully. The chill of the room, the chill of the night, was beginning to bite at me, though I barely noticed it through my anxious anticipation. Then Marcus's voice, abrupt and sharp, cut through the calms. Guys, I think I see something. There's a shimmer in the air in front of me, near where the old factory is." My heart raced. "What does it look like, Marcus?" Like heat waves, only it's anything but warm out here. And there's a sort of glow to it, almost like bioluminescence." "Stand fast," Leo's voice commanded. "Do not attempt to approach it if it is not moving towards the inhabited zones." I clenched my UV flashlight with my other hand, feeling the cold sweat of my palms even in the sub-zero chill. "This was it, they were here as well," Clara said, her voice strained. "Near the park, it's beautiful, like some sort of jellyfish, all iridescent and luminous." "Don't stare at it," I instructed, recalling Elia's frantic warnings. "Just see it out of the corner of your eye. Elias said not to directly observe them, that they can intrude on your perception, mess with your mind." I redoubled my efforts, knowing that it wouldn't be long before they made their way to this side of town. Still nothing from the Preston house, the family inside oblivious to the insidious threat that was inexorably approaching them. A wisp of motion drew my attention, a delicate tendril of light like a gossamer ribbon floating in the air. For a moment I thought it was just more of the wind-blown snow, but then I recognized it. The faint, shimmering outline of a bell-shaped body coalescing into visibility behind it. "Contact," I said quietly into the calm. "I see them. They're forming up near the old boat shed." Even as I spoke the words, I became acutely aware of the shimmering in the air around me. Graceful, delicate, almost transparent forms began to appear, drifting lazily on the currents of the wind. Their bodies glowed with a faint, inner luminescence, an ethereal beauty that seemed to defy logic, beautiful in a way that almost hurt to gaze upon them. I tore my eyes away from them, forcing myself to look back at the Preston house. "They're headed towards the Preston house," I said, a surge of adrenaline pushing through me. "I'm going to try to head them off." "Watch yourself, Walter," came Leo's voice in my ear, urgent and tight. "We're coming to support you." Marcus, Clara moved to Walter's position now. I took a deep breath, filled my lungs with freezing air, and stepped out from behind the dilapidated boat shed, lifting the UV flashlight towards the closest weaver. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking slightly in the cold, but infused with all the desperate defiance I could muster. "Keep away." The entities halted their drifting motion for a moment. Their iridescent forms shimmered, seeming to pulse with a faint curiosity. For a split second, I thought perhaps they might desist and drift away, back into whatever nebulous darkness from which they had emerged. Then as one, they surged forward, their delicate forms accelerating with an unnerving, silent speed with a flick of my thumb. The UV light blazed to life, casting its purplish glow into the mass of spectral forms. Instantly, the lunging entities recoiled, their incandescent shapes flickering and dimming wherever the beam passed over them, like smoke in a strong breeze. Emboldened, I took a step forward, sweeping the light from side to side. "It's working," I shouted back to my friends, my voice ringing with a fragile victory. The UV light affects them, but there were so many of them, and they were all around me now, a silent, swirling tide of glowing, ethereal forms. I reached into my pocket and retrieved a handful of salt, offering a quick, desperate prayer as I threw it at the nearest group of figures. The results were immediate and startling. Where the granules of salt struck the glowing forms, they seemed to dissolve, fading away in wisps of light, evaporating harmlessly into the chill night. But for every one that faded away, it seemed like two more took its place, solidifying from the shimmering air. They were endless. I continued to retreat towards the Preston house, keeping myself between them and the ghostly figures, a desperate, solitary shield. Sweat dripped into my eyes, stinging them, as I alternated between blasting the specters with UV light and throwing handfuls of salt. "Too many, guys," I said breathlessly into the comms, my voice strained with effort. "I need some help now." Almost on cue, I heard the hurried footfalls of someone running through the snow, crunching loudly. Leo slid to a stop beside me, adding his UV illumination to mine, bathing the front of the Preston house in an eerie purple glow. Moments later, Clara and Marcus joined us as well, flanking us and spreading out, shaking salt in front of us liberally. Our formation stretched across the front of the house, forming a fragile wall of purplish light and shimmering salt. The swirling figures drifted before us, their graceful forms now subtly contorted in what I could only describe as anger, or perhaps a deep, frustrated yearning, a system disrupted. "Hold the line," Leo called over the rising wind, his voice firm, a defiant anchor in the swirling chaos. "We can't let them get past us." It was nearly midnight. We were a handful of teenagers, fighting against incomprehensible odds, against the very fabric of our town's reality. I risked a glance back at the Preston house, and saw that they still hadn't ventured outside to see what was happening, their shadows moving placidly behind the lit windows, utterly unaware. I set my jaw and turned back to the task at hand. My arm was growing tired from holding the UV light, but we had no choice. We had to succeed. We had to protect this family and find a way to end whatever madness had gripped Port Serenity all those years ago. The Ether Weavers were closing in on us, their glowing forms brightening, growing more intense, pulsating with a rhythmic thrum that resonated deep in my bones. From somewhere distant, from the very heart of the town, I thought I heard the muted, muffled cheers of the townsfolk, counting down the final seconds of the year. 10, 9, 8. I didn't need to hear any more to know that when the clock struck midnight, these entities, these guardians of the dream weave, would be at the height of their power. Whatever was going to happen, it was going to happen soon. 7, 6, 5. I looked at my friends, their faces pale but resolute in the pulsing UV light, and saw the same fear and determination in their eyes that I felt. Whatever was about to happen, we would face it together. 4, 3, 2. The creatures surged upon us in a silent, luminous tide. 1, and then it was midnight. The world erupted in light and motion as the Ether Weavers swarmed, translucent and luminescent. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic bird in a cage, and I clenched the UV flashlight tightly in my fist. "Now," I yelled, barely able to hear my own voice above the eerie quiet that seemed to follow the entities, a vacuum of sound where they moved. As one, the four of us leapt into action, flickering our UV beams across the advancing forms, which coiled with ghostly spasms wherever the light touched them. "Let them get close," Leo shouted, grimacing as he fanned his beam back and forth, holding the line. Clara and Marcus were beside us, throwing handfuls of salt with practiced precision. Wherever the grains touched the figures, their forms disintegrated, glowing particles evaporating harmlessly into the darkness, like dust motes in sunlight. I risked a quick look back at the Preston home and spotted them still sitting in front of the TV through the window, completely unaware of what was happening just a few feet away from them. "We've got to pull them away from the house," I shouted to my companions. "Fan out, draw them away." We were already moving, though, a desperate dance of retreat and counterattack, drawing the things with our lights and our shifting motion. I could almost taste their hunger, their alien want, in the freezing air around us. It wasn't malice I sensed, but a system trying to reassert its order. They weren't hunting, they were trying to integrate. More of the town's folk had emerged from their buildings, drawn by the strange light, the flickering chaos. They stood dumbfounded in the street, watching us with wide-eyed awe and terror, their stillness-induced peace shattered. "Marcus, there are people behind us. Get them back," I called. Marcus nodded, his face pale with shock but his eyes still determined. He stepped out of our line, moving a few paces closer to the approaching civilians and shouting at them, waving his arms frantically, urging them to turn around and go back the way they came, back to their blissful, dream-filled homes. The ether weavers drifted closer, ebbing and flowing like a tide, as individual forms seemed to merge with their neighbors before separating again, their luminescence growing in intensity. I tore my gaze away from them, recalling Elia's caution about their entrancing movements. "They're flanking around us," Clara shouted, her voice grunting with the effort. It was true. For all we were keeping them at bay, we were allowing them to flank us and surround the group. Already they had pushed us away from the Preston house and had cut us off from the interior of the town. "We've got to punch through them," Leo shouted, his light dimming ominously as the batteries began to fade. "If we can get to the lighthouse, we can use the main light to keep them away." It was the only plan we had, a desperate Hail Mary attempt. We began to move together, directing our ultraviolet beams and throwing salt to punch a fragile hole through the mass of creatures. I thought of the town of Port Serenity and wondered how many years this had been happening, how many people had met their end, not at the hands of malevolent monsters, but as gentle integrations into a collective dream. We made it to the lighthouse, our backs pressed against the cold, rough stone base as the entities floated around us, their glow intensifying, a swirling vortex of ethereal light. "The door," I said, my voice hoarse, fumbling with the rusty padlock. "It's still locked." Leo pushed me aside, his face grim. He dug a pair of heavy bolt cutters from his pack. "Out of the way," he grunted, straining with the effort of cutting the rusted metal hasp. With a sharp snap it parted, and we stumbled inside, slamming the heavy wooden door behind us. I could see the light of the things outside leaking in through the various gaps and seams of the door and walls, a pulsating, alien glow. "All the way up," I said, taking the steps two at a time, my legs burning with the effort. "We've got to reach the lamp room." Up and up we went, our legs straining with the effort, the spiraling staircase a dizzying tunnel. I could almost feel the wordless pressure of those things pushing at the door far below, a collective, insistent will. But I knew it was only my imagination, the dream trying to reassert itself. At last we reached the uppermost level and stepped out into the space that housed the enormous Fresnel lens, still in place, its intricate prisms designed to rotate about the central oil lamp, sending its beam far out to sea. Clara looked around frantically. "How do we light it?" she asked, her voice tinged with desperation. Marcus shoved us aside and worked the old, rusted controls, his fingers flying over the dials and levers. "I've been studying this," he said, his voice tight with concentration. "Just a minute." The pressure on the door beneath us was growing stronger. I could hear the wood straining, starting to splinter. "Marcus," I said calmly, trying to control my breathing. "We don't have a minute." At that moment the great lamp lit with a stuttering hum, a blinding flash. The brightness of it, a raw, pure light, was far greater than the glow of our ultraviolet flashlights, casting its immense beam across the dark sky. I could see the instant effect it had upon the creatures outside. Their bodies disintegrated in the powerful, focused light, and the sound of their silent screams, a high-pitched, mental shriek of agony, filled the chill night air as they fled from its touch, dissolving into nothingness. The light swept across the town, a cleansing, brilliant arc. I saw incredulous townsfolk staring up at the lighthouse from where they had begun to exit their homes and places of hiding, their faces bleached of all color, their eyes wide with confusion, a dawning, terrible awareness. "It's working," said Clara breathlessly, the light from the rotation passing over her face, making her eyes gleam. But even as the beam made its first full circuit, I could see the things beginning to reform in the shadows, coalescing from the shimmering air, their forms slowly reweaving themselves. They were smart and they were fast. "We need more," I shouted, the words tumbling out of me. "Just the light isn't enough. They'll adapt." Leo's eyes lit up with a wild, desperate thought. "The salt," he said. "The snow machines at the ski resort. If we can route them to the supply we brought back earlier, the granular salt, we can lay a continuous barrier over the area." "And what about the other things Elias mentioned?" Marcus concluded, pulling up a map on his phone, his fingers flying. "The sound frequencies, the psychological disruptors. We could broadcast them through the town's emergency broadcast system. It's insane, but it's the only thing we could come up with." Behind us, I could sense the entities recovering, growing stronger, preparing to renew their attack, their silent presence pressing against the lighthouse walls. And we moved forward then, with the next step of our hopeless plan to rescue Port Serenity. This is where the story truly begins. My name is Walter Mills, and I am dying. The doctors gave me 6 months tops, but before I go, there's a story I need to tell. A tale of secrets, madness, and the chilling truth hidden beneath the placid surface of Port Serenity. It all started not on New Year's Eve, but years before, on a crisp autumn morning in 1962. I was a young sailor, fresh-faced and eager, reporting for duty on the USS Eldridge. The air buzzed with excitement and tension as we prepared for a classified naval mission. None of us knew what lay ahead, but we could feel the weight of importance hanging over us. As we boarded the ship, I noticed a group of figures standing apart from the rest. They wore flowing robes of midnight blue and crimson masks that covered their entire faces, intricate and unsettling, like ancient, forgotten deities. Even from a distance, there was something unnerving about them. They moved with an eerie grace, almost gliding across the deck, their steps unnaturally silent. "Who are they?" I whispered to Ramirez, a grizzled veteran standing next to me, his thick mustache bristling. He shook his head, his eyes narrowed. "No idea, kid, but whatever's going on, it's big. Bigger than anything I've seen in my 20 years at sea." We watched, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach as the masked figures approached Captain Hollister. Even our stern, unfappable leader seemed on edge as he spoke with them in hushed, urgent tones. Their voices, when they spoke, were oddly melodious, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them, though I couldn't discern their words. After a brief, intense conversation, they disappeared below deck, followed closely by the captain, his shoulders hunched. His usual proud bearing diminished hours passed before Captain Hollister emerged again, his face ashen, his uniform rumpled. His usual commanding presence seemed diminished, his eyes holding a haunted, distant look. He gathered us all on the main deck, his voice carrying over the constant, rhythmic churn of the ship's engines and the whisper of the waves against the hull. "Men," he began, his eyes scanning our faces, though his gaze seemed to look through us, at something far away, "we are about to embark on a mission of utmost importance and secrecy. I can't disclose the details, but know this, what we do here may change the course of history as we know it. The very fabric of reality could depend on our success." A murmur rippled through the crew, a nervous ripple of apprehension. I glanced at Briggs, a young sailor with a mop of unruly blonde hair, who was practically bouncing with a mixture of excitement and fear. The captain continued, his voice growing grave, a chilling solemnity settling over his words. "Due to the nature of this mission, we must take extreme precautions. Each of you will be issued a contingency pill. Keep it with you at all times. Guard it with your life." The deck fell silent, the only sound the distant shriek of gulls. I felt my stomach lurch, a cold dread coiling in my gut. "In the event of capture," Captain Hollister's voice resonated, "or if the mission is compromised beyond salvage, you are to take the pill immediately. There will be no exceptions. No negotiation. This is an order." Myers, a burly sailor with tattoos covering his massive arms, let out a low whistle, a sound of grim resignation. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, his usual bravado deflating. "Contingency pill. That's just a fancy word for cyanide, ain't it?" Captain Hollister's eyes narrowed, sweeping over the crew. "This is not a request, gentlemen, it's an order. Understand?" A chorus of reluctant "yes, sir," echoed across the deck, thin and strained. As we filed past to receive our pills, small, plain, white tablets, I noticed Yandel, a quiet, nervous man, trembling slightly. His eyes darted around, never settling on one spot for long, as if he expected something to materialize out of thin air back in our quarters. Theories flew wild, each one more outlandish than the last. Briggs, ever the joker, laughed it off, tossing his pill in the air and catching it with a practiced flick of his wrist. "It's probably just sugar pills," he said with a grin, a forced lightness in his tone. "Scare tactics to keep us in line. The old man just wants us to take it seriously." "Be an idiot, Briggs," Ramirez growled, his voice low and serious. "This is serious business. You saw the captain's face, and those strange ones. This ain't no game." I sat on my bunk, turning the small, innocuous-looking pill over in my hand. What had we gotten ourselves into? The masked figures, the chilling secrecy, the mandatory suicide clause, it all felt like something out of a fevered dream, a nightmarish tale come to life. As night fell and we set sail into the vast, inky blackness of the Pacific, leaving the familiar lights of the shore far behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were heading into something far beyond our understanding. The gentle rocking of the ship, usually so calming, did little to soothe my frayed nerves. As I lay awake in the narrow confines of my bunk, listening to the creaks and groans of the ship, I wondered what horrors awaited us in the depths of the ocean, or perhaps in the depths of ourselves. The sun had barely risen, a faint blush on the eastern horizon, when a commotion erupted on the deck. A shout, then another, quickly turning into a chorus of alarmed whispers. I rushed out of my bunk, heart pounding, to find a crowd gathered around a fallen figure near the main mast. As I pushed my way through the hushed throng, my stomach dropped. It was Briggs, lying motionless on the cold metal floor of the deck, his boyish face now twisted in a grimace. The mop of unruly hair I'd grown accustomed to seeing bounce around the ship now lay flat against his forehead, damp with sweat. His hand was clenched tightly at his side, and I could see the remnants of the small white pill, now fragmented and dissolved between his fingers. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, choked with a sudden, horrifying realization. Ramirez stood nearby, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. He shook his head, his thick mustache twitching with grim regret. "He took the pill," he said, his voice hollow. "The damn fool, thought it was a joke, a scare tactic, he called it. Didn't believe it was real." I stared at Briggs' lifeless body, the vibrant spark of his youth extinguished. A cold dread seeped into my bones, replacing the fear with a chilling certainty. "Clear the way," the captain's voice boomed across the deck, cutting through the hushed whispers like a whip. He strode towards us, his weathered face set in a grim expression, eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene. "What is the meaning of this, sir?" Myers growled, stepping forward, his massive frame radiating controlled anger. "We need to turn back, this ain't right. Briggs is dead. This is a damn suicide mission." The captain's piercing gaze locked onto Myers, cold and unyielding. "We will do no such thing, sailor. Our mission continues as planned, no exceptions. No turning back." A ripple of disbelief, of raw, desperate anger, ran through the crew. Yandel, standing at the edge of the group, his face pale, began to shake visibly, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. "But sir," he stammered, his voice a frantic squeak, "Briggs is dead. We can't just—" "Enough." The captain's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and final. "This is precisely why you were given those pills. The mission is paramount. We press on." I felt a chill, colder than the morning air, run down my spine as the captain continued, his voice lowering to a dangerous timbre, a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the deck. "As of this moment, all communications are cut off. No messages in or out. Is that clear?" A chorus of reluctant "Yes, sir," echoed across the deck, devoid of conviction. As the captain turned to leave, his back ramrod straight, he paused. "Get that body below deck," he commanded, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "We'll give him a proper burial at sea when time allows." I watched, numb and disbelieving, as Myers and Ramirez, their faces etched with a mixture of anger and sorrow, lifted Briggs' body. The rest of the crew dispersed slowly, muttering among themselves, their steps heavy with a newfound dread. I approached Yandel, who was still trembling, his face ghostly white. "You okay, Yandel?" I asked, placing a tentative hand on his shoulder. He flinched at my touch, as if burned. "This isn't right," he whispered, his eyes darting around nervously, unable to meet my gaze. "What are we really doing out here, Walter? What is this mission?" I had no answer for him. As we made our way back to our stations, the image of Briggs' lifeless body, his boyish face twisted in that final grimace, seared itself into my mind. The weight of the cyanide pill in my pocket seemed to grow heavier with each step, a constant, chilling reminder of the captain's cold, resolve throughout the day. Tension hung over the ship like a thick, suffocating fog. The usual banter and camaraderie among the crew were replaced by hushed whispers, furtive glances, and a pervasive, insidious suspicion. Even the endless expanse of the Pacific, usually a comforting, endless blue, seemed more ominous now, its deep waters hiding untold secrets beneath its shimmering surface. As I manned my post, my gaze sweeping the horizon, I caught glimpses of the secret ones moving about the ship, their silent presence a chilling constant. Their crimson masks gleamed dully in the sunlight, and their midnight blue robes seemed to flutter even when there was no breeze, as if stirred by an invisible current. They spoke to no one, their movements precise and purposeful, their very existence a living enigma, a constant reminder of the profound mystery surrounding our mission. At one point, I saw Myers, unable to contain his simmering rage, confront one of them near the stern. His muscular frame towering over the robed figure, fists clenched at his sides, his face a mask of furious desperation. "What the hell are you people?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the deck, raw and trembling with suppressed anger. "What do you want from us? What did you do to Briggs?" The secret one merely tilted their head, their crimson mask revealing nothing, no hint of expression or understanding. After a moment of tense, agonizing silence, they simply glided away, their movements unnervingly fluid, leaving Myers fuming, his hands shaking with impotent rage. As night fell, or what we assumed was night given the sun's unchanging position, I found myself on watch with Ramirez. We stood in silence for a long while, the only sound the gentle lapping of waves against the hull, a hypnotic, unsettling rhythm in the vast silence of the ocean. Finally, Ramirez spoke, his voice low, rough like sandpaper. "I've been at sea for 20 years, Walter," he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon, though there was nothing but endless ocean to see. "Never seen anything like this, never felt anything like this." I nodded, unsure of what to say, what comfort I could offer when I felt the same gnawing dread. "Whatever's going on," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "it's big. Bigger than us, bigger than Briggs, bigger than anything I can fathom." He turned to me then, his weathered face grave in the pale, eerie moonlight that seemed to emanate not from the sky, but from the very water itself. "Keep your wits about you, kid. I've got a feeling things are going to get a lot worse before they get better, and I don't think there's anything out here that can save us." 3 days after Briggs' death, I woke to an unsettling stillness. The usual hum of the ship's engines, the rhythmic groan of the hull, the distant clatter of pots in the galley, all seemed muffled, swallowed by an oppressive silence, as if we were suspended in a void, disconnected from the very world. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes to the darkness, but it was impenetrable, absolute. "What the hell?" I muttered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the suffocating quiet, as I fumbled for the light switch. It clicked, but nothing happened. I tried another and another. No light. I stumbled out of my bunk, hands outstretched, feeling my way to the door. The corridor outside was equally dark, filled with confused voices and the sound of people bumping into walls. "Anyone got a light?" someone called out, their voice edged with panique match flared to life, illuminating Ramirez's weathered face in the flickering glow. His eyes were wide, reflecting the tiny flame. In the brief, dancing light, I saw the confusion and fear etched on the faces of my fellow crew members, ghostly visages in the sudden, transient illumination. "What's going on?" Yandel's voice quavered from somewhere in the darkness, choked with barely suppressed terror. "Power outage, maybe," I suggested, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. This darkness felt different, unnatural. It wasn't an absence of light. It was an active presence of blackness, dense and consuming. We made our way, a stumbling, anxious procession, to the upper deck, hoping for some answers, for a glimpse of the familiar sky. As we emerged into the open air, a collective gasp rippled through the group. The sky above us was a blank canvas of pure, unfathomable black. No stars, no moon, just an endless void, a terrifying, velvet emptiness that stretched from horizon to horizon, swallowing every shred of light. "This ain't right," Myers growled, his burly frame tense, his voice a guttural whisper of disbelief. "Where's the damn moon? Where are the stars?" We stood there, a group of grown men, hardened sailors, reduced to wide-eyed children in the face of this inexplicable phenomenon. The darkness seemed to press in on us from all sides, a palpable weight, swallowing the beam of the few flashlights we'd managed to find, their feeble rays swallowed by the void. As dawn approached, we waited with bated breath for the first rays of sunlight to break through the endless night. But they never came. The sun, like the moon and stars, had vanished. All hands on deck. The captain's voice cut through the darkness, somehow even more commanding, more resonant in the absence of light. We gathered around him, our faces ghoulish in the glow of his single lantern, its light barely piercing the oppressive gloom. "I know you're all concerned," he began, his eyes sweeping over us, though they seemed to hold no light, only weary resignation. "But we must maintain order and continue our mission." "Mission," Myers spat, his voice thick with contempt. "What mission? We're sailing in the dark to God knows where. We're blind." The captain's gaze hardened, a flicker of his old authority returning. "That's enough, sailor. Return to your post and await further instructions." As we dispersed, a sense of dread settling over us like a shroud, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. The secret ones had emerged from below deck, their crimson masks gleaming dully in the lantern light, their midnight blue robes seeming to absorb the little illumination that existed. They moved with purpose, an unnerving, silent efficiency, carrying strange, intricate equipment I'd never seen before. Gleaming metallic rods, glowing orbs, pulsating crystals. Over the next few hours, I watched as they set up what looked like complex alien communication arrays on the upper decks, their hushed voices carrying on the still air, speaking in a language I couldn't understand, a series of clicks, hisses, and resonant hums that felt more like vibrations in my skull than actual words. "What do you think they're doing?" I asked Ramirez as we watched from our post, peering through the gloom. He shook his head, his mustache twitching with unease. "Nothing good, I'd wager. Nothing good at all." As the day wore on, or what we assumed was day given the unchanging blackness, theories began to circulate among the crew, each one more outlandish than the last, fueled by fear and sleep deprivation. "It's got to be aliens," Yandel whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "They've blocked out the sun somehow. They're coming for us." "Don't be ridiculous, Yandel," Ramirez scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "It's more likely we've sailed into some kind of government experiment. Maybe a new weapon that can control the weather, or a secret project that went wrong." Myers, who had been pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his frustration a palpable aura around him, suddenly stopped. His eyes, though barely visible in the gloom, seemed distant, haunted. What if there's been a nuclear war?" he said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet, raw with a terrifying realization. "Maybe this is what the end of the world looks like, just nothing." The thought sent a chill down my spine, a cold, creeping certainty. I tried to push it away, to cling to some semblance of hope, but in the oppressive darkness, it was hard to keep the fear at bay. As night fell, or what we perpetually assumed was night given the unending blackness, the atmosphere on the ship grew even more tense, more suffocating. The air itself seemed to crackle with unspoken dread. The Secret Ones continued their mysterious activities, their movements becoming more frantic, more urgent as time passed. Their clicking and humming grew louder, more insistent. I found myself standing at the railing, staring out into the inky void that had swallowed the ocean, trying to find some anchor in the endless emptiness. The gentle lapping of waves against the hull was the only reminder that we were still at sea, and not floating in some nightmarish abyss, a forgotten ship adrift in the cosmic nothing. A hand on my shoulder made me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. It was Yandel, his face pale, almost translucent, in the dim, flickering light of a nearby lantern. "Do you think we'll ever see the sun again, Walter?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, trembling with a fragile hope I couldn't share. I wanted to reassure him, to say that of course we would, that this was just some strange but temporary phenomenon, a cosmic blip. But the words stuck in my throat, dry and heavy. In that moment, surrounded by endless darkness and mounting dread, with the unsettling hum of the Secret One's alien instruments filling the air, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. "I don't know, Yandel," I finally admitted, my voice as hollow as my own growing hope. "I just don't know." A week had passed since the darkness had enveloped us, a week lost to an endless, lightless night. The atmosphere on the ship had grown thick with tension and despair, a suffocating shroud that clung to every man. The constant blackness weighed on our minds, fraying nerves and pushing tempers to the breaking point. I'd taken to pacing the corridors during what I assumed were night hours, unable to sleep in the oppressive gloom, haunted by the unsettling silence and the distant, alien hum of the Secret One's instruments. As I rounded a corner near the ship's gym, a commotion erupted ahead, raised voices, sharp, angry shouts, and the unmistakable sound of scuffling feet echoing off the metal walls. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drum against bone. I quickened my pace, dread coiling in my gut. The scene that greeted me as I entered the gym was one of chaos. Myers, his massive frame silhouetted in the dim, flickering emergency lighting, had Yandel pinned against a wall, his arm pressed against the smaller man's throat. Yandel's feet dangled inches off the ground, his face contorted in pain and terror, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. "You been talking to them, haven't you?" Myers growled, his face inches from Yandel's, his eyes blazing with a manic, paranoid intensity I'd never seen before. "Tell me what they're planning. What did they tell you?" Yandel's eyes darted wildly, pleading. "I don't know what you're talking about," he wheezed, his voice choked. "Please, let me go." I stepped forward, my hands raised in a placating gesture. "Myers, come on, put him down. This isn't helping anyone." "He doesn't know anything." Myers' head snapped towards me, his eyes blazing with that same manic intensity, a horrifying, almost feral light. "Stay out of this, Mills," he snarled, his voice raw. This little rat's been sneaking around, whispering with those masked freaks. He knows something. He's with them. Before I could respond, before I could reason with the desperate, paranoid rage consuming Myers, Yandel's knee shot up, catching Myers in the groin. The larger man howled in pain, a guttural roar, releasing his grip. Yandel dropped to the floor, scrambling away, his breath coming in ragged, desperate sobs. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, a nightmarish tableau illuminated by the unreliable, flickering emergency lights. Myers, recovering from the blow, lunged at Yandel with a roar of pure, unadulterated rage, his face a mask of primal fury. Yandel, eyes wide with terror, grabbed a nearby dumbbell, its cold metal gleaming dully in the dim light, and swung it in a wild, desperate arc. The sickening crunch of metal meeting flesh filled the air, a wet, sickening sound that resonated deep in my bones. Myers staggered back, a choked gasp escaping his lips, blood pouring in a dark, viscous stream from a deep gash above his eye. He touched the wound, staring at his crimson-stained fingers in disbelief, his eyes unfocused. You little," he mumbled, his words slurring, losing coherence. Then, without warning, he charged again, a blind, unthinking force. Yandel, still clutching the dumbbell, tried to dodge, but Myers' sheer bulk and momentum were too much. They crashed into a rack of weights, sending barbells clattering to the floor with a deafening clang that echoed through the confined space. In the ensuing struggle, Myers' hand, massive and calloused, closed around Yandel's throat, squeezing with brutal force. I rushed forward, adrenaline coursing through my veins, trying to pry them apart, but it was like trying to separate two magnets, locked in an unbreakable, deadly embrace. As I grappled with Myers' arm, trying to force his grip open, I saw Yandel's hand, trembling and desperate, disappear into his pocket. "No," I shouted, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. No, I knew what he was about to do, but it was too late. Yandel's jaw clenched, a grim, final resolve settling over his face, and his body went rigid. Foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth as the cyanide pill took effect, its deadly work swift and brutal. His eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and grim determination, locked onto mine for a brief, horrifying moment, a silent plea, a final farewell before the light in them faded, extinguished like a candle in a gale. Myers, still grappling, his eyes wide, released his grip, stumbling backward, his face a mask of confusion. What just happened?" he mumbled, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had come, replaced by a dawning horror. I knelt beside Yandel's lifeless body, my hands shaking uncontrollably, the dumbbell he'd used to defend himself lying nearby, now streaked with Myers' blood. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Myers' labored, ragged breathing and the distant, unsettling hum of the ship's engines, a constant, omnipresent reminder of our inescapable plight. As I looked up at Myers, I saw the dawning horror on his face, the slow, agonizing realization of what he'd done. The gash above his eye continued to bleed, the crimson stream a stark contrast to his rapidly paling skin. I didn't mean to," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with genuine shock and remorse. "He was talking to them, he was with them. I just wanted answers, I swear." I stood slowly, my mind reeling, the horrors compounding, blurring the lines of sanity. "We need to report this," I said, though the words felt hollow, utterly meaningless in the face of what had transpired. Myers nodded numbly, his eyes never leaving Yandel's body, his gaze fixed on the grim, unmoving figure. As we made our way to find the captain, the weight of what had transpired settled over us like a shroud, thick and suffocating. The darkness that had consumed our world outside now seemed to have found its way into our hearts, leaching out all hope, all reason. The lines between right and wrong, sanity and madness, were blurring with each passing day. And as I glanced at Myers' haunted, shattered expression, I couldn't help but wonder how long before the rest of us succumbed to this creeping despair, this insidious unraveling of the mind. I crept through the darkened corridors of the ship, my nerves on edge, stretched taut like violin strings ready to snap. Sleep had eluded me for days now, the constant, oppressive darkness and mounting tension wearing away at my sanity, blurring the edges of what was real. Every creak of the ship, every whisper of the wind, sounded like a monstrous presence. As I rounded a corner near the officers' mess, a faint glow caught my eye, a sliver of otherworldly light spilling from beneath a cabin door. My heart raced, a frantic drum in my chest, as I approached. This was one of the cabins assigned to the secret ones, the robed figures whose chilling silence and inscrutable masks had become a constant, terrifying backdrop to our descent into madness. I'd never seen inside their quarters before. Curiosity, a desperate, morbid need to understand, warred with an overwhelming, primal fear. I hesitated outside, my hand hovering over the cold metal of the door. The sensible part of me screamed to turn back, to retreat to the dubious safety of my bunk, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But some deeper instinct, a fatalistic compulsion, propelled me forward. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear any sound from within. Nothing. Only the faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the ship, a sound I now associated with their presence. Slowly, carefully, I turned the handle and eased the door open a crack, just enough to peer inside. The sight that greeted me sent ice through my veins, freezing my blood in its tracks. One of the secret ones stood in the center of the small, cramped room, its back to me, but this was no human form, not truly. Beneath those flowing robes of midnight blue, the creature's body seemed to shift and undulate, as if made of living clay or perhaps liquid shadow. It wasn't a solid, stable form. It flowed and pulsed, a dark, shifting mass. As I watched in horror, it raised spindly, impossibly long arms, ending not in fingers, but in two long, glistening claws like obsidian blades. With sickening precision, it began to slice into its own flesh, peeling back layers of what appeared to be skin to reveal pulsing, luminescent organs beneath. There was no blood, only a viscous, oily substance that oozed from the wounds, shimmering with an inner, unearthly light. My stomach churned, a wave of nausea washing over me, as the thing manipulated its own innards, rearranging them like puzzle pieces, or perhaps tuning some internal mechanism. All the while it emitted a low, continuous keening sound, a sound that wasn't a vocalization, but a resonance that seemed to vibrate in my very bones, setting my teeth on edge. It was a sound of immense, terrible concentration, or perhaps pain. I must have made some small noise of disgust, a choked gasp, for suddenly, with an impossible speed that defied anatomy, the creature's head swiveled 180 degrees to face me. Where a face should have been was only a writhing mass of short, stubby tentacles, like thick worms, surrounding a single, enormous, unblinking eye. It was an eye unlike anything I had ever seen, deep and ancient, a swirling vortex of green and purple light terror, cold and absolute, gripped me. I stumbled backward, my heart thundering in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs, as I scrambled to close the door and fled down the corridor. The unnatural eye seared into my mind, its alien gaze burning a hole in my sanity. When I finally stopped running, gasping for breath, I found myself in a deserted part of the ship, leaning against a cold metal wall, trying to process what I'd seen. It defied all logic, all understanding of biology, all sanity. What were these things we'd brought on board? What had the captain unleashed upon us? And what did they mean to do with our ship, with us in this endless, terrifying darkness? I stood on the bridge, my eyes straining against the oppressive, absolute darkness that had become our constant companion for what felt like an eternity. The air felt thick, heavy, with an unnatural stillness that set my nerves on edge, making my skin crawl. The only sound was the low, ceaseless hum of the ship's engines, a monotonous drone that was slowly driving us all mad. Suddenly, the door creaked open behind me, and I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. The captain stumbled in, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, my breath caught in my chest. The man before me was a far cry from the stern, authoritative figure I'd known. His uniform hung loosely on his gaunt frame, his shoulders stooped, and his face was a mask of exhaustion and despair. Deep, bruised shadows carved hollows beneath his bloodshot eyes, and his skin had taken on an unhealthy, waxy pallor, almost translucent in the dim emergency light. He looked like a ghost. "Captain," I ventured, taking a hesitant step towards him, my voice a tentative whisper. He didn't seem to register my presence. Instead, he shuffled to the center of the bridge, his movements stiff, as if his limbs no longer obeyed him fully. When he spoke, his voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible above the low hum of the ship's engines. "Goodbye," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the endless blackness beyond the shattered viewport. "Goodbye, goodbye." A chill ran down my spine as he continued to repeat the word, his voice growing more frantic, more desperate with each iteration. It was a chilling farewell to a world we had lost, and perhaps to his own sanity. I reached out to touch his arm, hoping to snap him out of whatever trance had gripped him, to bring him back to us. But he flinched away from my touch as if burned, recoiling with a shudder. Before I could make another attempt, before I could try to reach him again, the door burst open. Myers barreled in, his face flushed and his eyes wild, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "The gun deck," he panted, gesturing frantically behind him, his voice laced with a fresh, raw horror. "You've got to see this, Walter." Casting one last worried glance at the captain, who continued his eerie, detached mantra of goodbye. I followed Myers out of the bridge and down to the gun deck, dread coiling in my gut. The sight that greeted us there turned my blood to ice. The secret ones, their crimson masks gleaming dully in the flickering, orange light of a makeshift pyre, stood in a silent, perfect circle. At the center of their ring, bodies burned. The stench of charred flesh filled the air, thick and sickening, making my stomach heave, bile rising in my throat. What the hell? I gasped, struggling to comprehend the horrific scene before me. My mind refusing to accept what my eyes saw. Myers grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my flesh. His own breath hitched. "Those are our crew, Walter," he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of raging fury and primal fear. "Our men, they're burning them." I recognized Briggs' watch, the one his ma gave him, and Corporal Hayes' dog tags. The full, agonizing horror of his words sank in, chilling me to the core. This wasn't some unknown enemy. This was an insidious, internal betrayal. A deafening crack split the air above us. The ship lurched violently, sending us stumbling, throwing us off balance. Water sprayed over the deck, cold and biting, as massive, impossible waves, born of the unnatural darkness, began to pummel the ship from all sides. "All hands on deck," Ramirez's voice boomed from somewhere above us, frantic and desperate. "We're taking on water. The hull is breached." Chaos erupted as crew members scrambled to respond to the sudden, overwhelming onslaught. I struggled to keep my footing as the ship pitched and rolled beneath us, tossed like a toy in a monstrous bathtub. Through the deafening din of alarms, rushing water, and splintering metal, I could hear screams of pain as people were thrown against walls or struck by loose equipment, their cries swallowed by the tempest. The secret ones, however, remained unnaturally still amidst the pandemonium, their masks turned towards the raging, impossible sea, as another monstrous wave crashed over the deck. As the water swept over me, I caught a glimpse of something vast and terrible in the churning depths below, just beneath the surface, a vast, writhing shape, impossibly large, like a mountain made of living shadow. The storm intensified, its fury unleashed upon our battered ship with relentless, unimaginable force. I clung to a railing, my knuckles white with effort, the metal biting into my skin as the vessel pitched and rolled beneath my feet, groaning like a dying beast. The sky above, once an impenetrable void, now blazed with an otherworldly light, flashes of sickly green and pulsing purple tearing through the endless darkness, illuminating the churning, monstrous sea in a grotesque, horrific tableau. With each burst of unnatural radiance, I glimpsed things that defied comprehension, things that made my mind reel. Vast, writhing shapes, forms that twisted and undulated just beneath the waves, their scale unimaginable, their outlines blurred by the abyssal gloom. They were like mountains or continents of living, alien flesh. "Dear God," I whispered, my voice lost in the howling wind, choked with terror. A nearby cry snapped me from my horrified trance. Ramirez stood at the ship's edge, his eyes wide, wild and unfocused, his face a mask of terror and a strange, desperate peace. Before I could react, before I could even process what he was doing, he climbed onto the railing, his body silhouetted against the bizarre, pulsating sky. "Ramirez, no." I screamed, my voice ripped away by the wind as I lunged towards him, my hand outstretched. But I was too late. With a haunting, guttural laugh that echoed across the deck, a sound of utter despair and release, Ramirez spread his arms wide and leapt into the roiling, phosphorescent waters below. The sea, that unimaginable maw, swallowed him in an instant, leaving no trace of the man I'd known, only a ripple in the glowing, turbulent surface. I staggered back, my mind reeling from the successive losses, the relentless assault on my sanity. Another blinding flash of sickly green light lit up the sky, and I looked up instinctively. What I saw froze the blood in my veins, solidified it into icy dread. Vast, tentacled monstrosities, like living storm clouds, writhed across the heavens, their impossible forms twisting in ways that hurt to look at, defying all geometry, all sanity. Eyes larger than moons blinked lazily, focusing on our tiny, doomed vessel with a malevolent, ancient interest. I felt my sanity fraying at the edges, unraveling thread by thread, as I tried to comprehend the cosmic horror unfolding before me, a nightmare made flesh. A reality turned inside out. A deafening crack split the air, followed by the screech of tearing metal, a sound that grated on my very soul. I whirled around to see a massive wave, easily 100 feet high, a towering wall of impossible water, bearing down on us, its crest glowing with the same unholy light as the things in the sky. There was no time to brace for impact, no time to even scream. The wall of water slammed into the ship with devastating, bone-shattering force. I was thrown off my feet, tumbling across the deck like a rag doll as frigid, luminous seawater engulfed me. For terrifying moments I was submerged, tossed and spun, unable to tell up from down in the swirling chaos, my lungs burning. When I finally broke the surface, gasping for air, choking on the salty, glowing water, I found myself in the flooded bridge, now a wreckage of twisted metal and shattered glass. Bodies floated around me, dismembered fragments of what were once my crew members, men who hadn't been able to escape the deluge. Their lifeless eyes stared accusingly, fixed on the impossible alien sky, as I treaded water, trying desperately to make sense of our new reality through the shattered windows of the bridge. I saw the captain. He stood rigidly at attention, water lapping at his chest, completely submerged below his shoulders, his gaze fixed on something outside, something beyond my sight. He was utterly still, an unmoving statue in the swirling chaos. Then, through a newly formed fissure in the hull, a colossal eye, easily the size of our entire ship, peered in at us, its pupil a swirling vortex of unimaginable depth. Tendrils thick as redwood trees snaked around the bridge, their suckers latching onto the metal with sickening pops and tearing sounds. The creature, if such a mundane word could even apply to this cosmic horror, seemed to radiate an ancient, alien malevolence, an intelligence that dwarfed all human comprehension. The captain turned to me then, his face a mask of grim resignation, a quiet understanding in his haunted eyes. Without a word, he drew his service pistol from its holster, the dull gleam of the metal a stark contrast to the luminous eye outside. "Captain, don't!" I started to scream, to plead, but my words were drowned out by the thunderous report of the gun, echoing in the confined space. The captain's body slumped into the water, carried away by the surging currents, leaving me alone, treading water in the ruins of our bridge, face to face with an entity beyond human comprehension, an entity that had witnessed the birth and death of stars. The creature's presence filled the flooded bridge, an oppressive, suffocating weight bearing down on my mind, crushing my thoughts. Its massive eye, a swirling vortex of impossible colors, focused entirely on me, and I felt an alien consciousness, vast and cold, probing at the edges of my thoughts. Pain, sharp and excruciating, lanced through my skull as it burrowed deeper, a mental intrusion that made my very being recoil. It was sifting through my memories and experiences with a cold, clinical precision, like a librarian sorting through dusty books. Images flashed before my eyes, not just my own memories, but others. My childhood home, bathed in a sunlight I hadn't seen in days, my first day on the ship, the innocent eagerness, the horrific moment of discovering the true nature of our mission, the cyanide pills. Each memory was tinged with an otherworldly, shifting filter, as if viewed through a fractured, alien lens. I gritted my teeth, fighting against the intrusion, against the violation of my innermost self. "Get out of my head," I screamed, my voice hoarse and raw, a desperate, futile cry against the mental assault. The creature's eye pulsed with an eerie internal light, and I felt its attention sharpen, its focus narrowing entirely on me. The pain intensified, threatening to split my skull, to tear my mind apart. I thrashed in the water, desperate to escape, to find some reprieve, but there was nowhere to go. There was no escape within the confines of the shattered bridge, or perhaps within the confines of my own mind. As the alien presence delved deeper, plunging into the very core of my consciousness, I caught terrifying glimpses of its own alien thoughts, its own unimaginable experiences. Vast, incomprehensible vistas of time and space that threatened to shatter my sanity. I saw civilizations rise and fall in the blink of an eye, entire galaxies swallowed by hungry, cosmic voids, stars extinguished like candles. My mind reeled, teetering on the brink of absolute madness, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of its existence. In a desperate, primal act of defiance, I latched onto the one thing that had always anchored me, the one unwavering truth in my life. My family. I focused on the memory of my wife's smile, the gentle curve of her lips, the pure, unadulterated sound of my daughter's laughter, a bell-like chime. Their faces bloomed in my mind, vivid and luminous, a bulwark against the cosmic horror trying to consume me, a shield against the alien onslaught. "I love you," I whispered, clinging to the image of my family, pouring every ounce of love and warmth and humanity I possessed into that single thought. I love you both so much. The creature's probing faltered, as if encountering something it couldn't understand, something entirely alien to its cold, vast consciousness. I pressed my advantage, flooding my mind with every cherished memory I had of my loved ones. Our wedding day, bathed in sunlight and laughter. My daughter's first wobbly steps, her tiny hand gripping mine. Quiet evenings spent together, the simple, profound peace of their presence. I poured all the love and warmth I could muster into these recollections. A desperate torrent of humanity. The pain in my head began to recede, a slow, agonizing withdrawal, and I felt the alien presence retreating, its vast consciousness pulling back from the confines of my mind. The massive eye blinked, a slow, deliberate movement, and for a moment I sensed something almost like confusion emanating from the creature, a flicker of uncertainty. Slowly, painfully, the colossal tendrils wrapped around the bridge began to loosen, their grip dissolving. Water rushed in through the gaps, a torrent of freezing liquid, and I struggled to keep my head above the rising tide, my body aching, shivering uncontrollably. The eye's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, a final, unblinking assessment. Then it began to retreat, pulling its unimaginable bulk into the depths, vanishing into the inky blackness from which it had emerged. As the creature disappeared beneath the waves, its immense form receding into the abyss, I felt my consciousness slipping away, the exhaustion finally claiming me. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the image of my wife and daughter, their faces etched with worry and love, a final, precious memory clinging to the edges of my fading mind. I opened my eyes to a blinding sun, a searing, brilliant orb I hadn't seen in what felt like an eternity, and the gentle lapping of waves against something solid beneath me. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest as I tried to move, a profound exhaustion weighing down my limbs. I was lying on my back, floating on what felt like a piece of debris, a broken fragment of wood, in the vast expanse of the ocean. The sky above was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a stark, almost painful contrast to the cosmic horrors and unending darkness I'd witnessed. How long had I been unconscious? Hours, days, weeks. I turned my head slowly, wincing at the searing pain in my neck. In every direction there was nothing but endless ocean, a vast, shimmering expanse of blue that stretched to the horizon. My throat was parched, lips cracked and bleeding from severe dehydration, my tongue swollen and dry. I closed my eyes again, trying to piece together what had happened, the ship, the storm, the monstrous eye staring into my very soul. A shudder ran through me at the memory. Had it all been real, or some fever dream brought on by prolonged exposure to the darkness, by the madness of the confinement? A distant sound caught my attention, a low, rhythmic thrumming of an engine. I forced my eyes open, squinting against the glare of the sun on the water. On the horizon, a faint smudge at first, I could just make out the silhouette of a boat, growing slowly larger. "Hey!" I tried to shout, but my voice came out as a hoarse, painful whisper, barely audible even to myself. I waved my arm weakly, a desperate, almost futile gesture, praying they would spot me. The boat grew larger as it approached. It was a fishing vessel, weather-beaten but sturdy, its hull scarred by countless voyages. I could see figures moving on the deck, pointing in my direction. Relief, a profound, overwhelming wave of it, washed over me as I realized they had seen me. As they drew alongside, a coiled rope was thrown, splashing lightly in the water near me. I grabbed it with trembling, clumsy hands, my fingers raw and stiff, allowing myself to be pulled towards the boat. Strong, calloused arms reached down, hauling me aboard. I collapsed onto the deck, gasping and shaking, my body utterly spent. "Easy there, friend," a gruff voice said in heavily accented English. "You're safe now. Just breathe." I looked up at my rescuers, a group of weathered fishermen, their faces etched with concern and curiosity, their eyes kind. One of them, an older man with deep lines around his eyes and a grizzled beard, knelt beside me, offering a canteen of water. Where am I?" I managed to croak, my voice barely a rasp. "About 50 miles off the coast of Guam," he replied, his voice calm. "You're lucky we found you. What happened to your ship, son?" Guam. We had been nowhere near Guam when whatever it was had happened. How had I drifted so far? How long had I been out there? My mind reeled. I shook my head, unable to form a coherent answer, the memories a jumbled, terrifying mess. The fisherman patted my shoulder gently. "Rest now. We'll get you to shore and sort things out there. You're lucky to be alive." As they bustled around me, providing water and a rough blanket, my hand brushed against something in my pocket. With a jolt, a sudden, electric shock of memory, I remembered the documents. the stolen documents from the secret ones. Somehow, miraculously, they were still there, protected by a waterproof pouch, intact. I closed my eyes, exhaustion overtaking me, pulling me into a deep, dreamless void. But even as I drifted off, my mind raced. What secret did those papers hold? What was the true nature of our mission, and of the horrors we'd encountered? And why, after all that, was I the only one left, as the fishing boat docked in Guam, a bustling port city vibrant with life and noise? I stumbled onto solid ground for the first time in what felt like an eternity. My legs were wobbly, unused to the stillness of land after so long at sea, my body protesting every movement. The fishermen who had rescued me spoke in hushed, urgent tones to local authorities, gesturing in my direction, their faces grave. I clutched the waterproof pouch containing the stolen documents close to my chest, acutely aware of their weight and the unimaginable secrets they held. The next few days passed in a blur of medical examinations, debriefings by stern-faced naval officers who seemed to know more than they let on, and fitful, nightmare-ridden sleep, plagued by visions of writhing tentacles and impossibly large, ancient eyes. When I was finally left alone in a small, impersonal hotel room, the silence was deafening. I spread the damp, crinkled pages across the bed, my hands trembling with a mixture of anticipation and fear. The documents were a bewildering mix. Ancient-looking parchments, brittle and smelling of forgotten things, covered in swirling, unintelligible scripts, interspersed with more modern, typewritten reports, stark and clinical. Many were in languages I didn't recognize, flowing scripts that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them, hinting at a reality far older and stranger than I could comprehend. But there were enough in English, enough decipherable diagrams and translated passages, for me to begin piecing together the horrifying truth, a truth so profound it threatened to shatter the fragile remnants of my sanity. I worked tirelessly, barely sleeping or eating, the passage of time marked only by the rise and set of the sun outside my window. I delved deeper into the cosmic secrets laid out before me, my mind racing, desperate for understanding. Slowly, painstakingly, the truth about Eden began to take shape. Eden, I learned, was not a place, not the biblical garden, but an entity. An ancient, cosmic being of unimaginable power, responsible for seeding life throughout the universe. Earth was just one of countless worlds touched by Eden's influence, one of its experiments. The entity had arrived on our planet billions of years ago, a primordial cosmic gardener, nurturing the primordial soup that would eventually give rise to all life as we know it, shaping evolution itself. But humanity's evolution, I discovered with a chilling dread, had taken an unexpected, unforeseen turn. As our species grew in intelligence and complexity, as our consciousness expanded, we began to have an effect on Eden itself. Our thoughts, our emotions, our very essence, our collective consciousness. It was somehow feeding back into the cosmic entity that had created us, altering it, influencing it at first. This symbiosis had been beneficial. Eden, the documents explained, grew stronger, more vibrant, its universal purpose amplified by the burgeoning life it had fostered. But as human civilization advanced, as our population exploded and our collective consciousness became more complex, more turbulent, something began to change. Our darker impulses, greed, hatred, selfishness, violence, fear, began to corrupt Eden. The entity that had once been a source of pure creation, of life-giving cosmic energy, was now tainted by humanity's worst traits, becoming twisted, diseased. The secret ones, I discovered, were not alien invaders, but an ancient order, a secret society of humans dedicated to protecting Eden, to preserving its purity. They had watched over millennia as humanity's influence grew more toxic, as our collective subconscious polluted the very wellspring of life. Now, they believed, the only way to save Eden, and by extension all life in the universe that Eden had spawned, was to destroy the source of the corruption. Humanity itself. They were not monsters, they were desperate surgeons, attempting a horrific but necessary amputation. My hands shook uncontrollably as I read the final pages, the words blurring, the implications of my discovery shattering what was left of my composure. The mission I had been part of, the ship I had served on, the Eldridge, was just one small, terrifying piece of a much larger, global plan. The secret ones were working to awaken Eden fully, to bring the cosmic entity into our world in its entirety, to unleash its power. They believed that only by confronting humanity directly, by purging its cancerous influence, could Eden cleanse itself, purge itself of our corrupting touch. As I stared at the last document, my mind reeling, a terrible thought struck me. The storm we had encountered, the monstrous forms we had glimpsed in the sky and beneath the waves, the impossible eye that had peered into my soul, had that been Eden, partially awakened? And if so, what would a fully conscious, fully unleashed Eden do to our world? To us? I looked out the window at the bustling, sunlit streets of Guam. People went about their daily lives, laughing, working, loving, utterly oblivious to the cosmic horror that lurked just beyond the veil of their reality, the silent war being waged for the soul of creation itself. I thought about my family, about my wife and daughter, about all the families around the world. Did they deserve to be wiped out, to be purged from existence, because of humanity's flaws, because of a cosmic disease we had inadvertently spread? But then I remembered the cold, alien presence that had invaded my mind on the bridge, the utter lack of empathy or compassion I had felt from that vast intelligence. If Eden had already been so corrupted by humanity's worst traits, if it had become a reflection of our darkest selves, was there any hope of saving it? Or ourselves? I gathered the documents, my mind racing, a hurricane of conflicting thoughts and desperate plans. What could I do with this information? Who would even believe me? I did what I could. I spent years in anonymity, using the few resources I had, haunted by the memories, driven by a desperate, if perhaps foolish, hope. I found others who had witnessed similar anomalies, others who had glimpsed the ether weavers in different parts of the world, others who were called broken ones by the secret order. We formed a loose, paranoid network, sharing fragmented lore, ancient texts, and desperate theories. I learned that my encounter on the Eldridge wasn't just a mission. It was a probe, an attempt by the secret ones to tune Eden to a specific frequency, to prepare it for its final awakening. The Port Serenity stillness drops and ether weavers, they were a localized manifestation, a smaller-scale tuning, a microcosm of the global plan, perhaps even a test. The secret ones, they were human, but not like us. They had transcended, or so they believed, and now they sought to bring about a new paradigm, a cleansing. My efforts were futile. The secret ones were too vast, too deeply entrenched. They didn't just control governments, they influenced the flow of information, the very perception of reality. They were the ones who crafted the stillness that Port Serenity so desperately clung to. The stillness drops were their creation, a way to optimize the absorption of consciousness, to make the integration peaceful, to make the offering blissful. It was a mercy, they claimed, to sleep through the horror, to dream a pleasant dream, while the rest of the world, the unwoken, continued to infect Eden with their discordant reality. I returned to Port Serenity, a broken man, but with a terrible clarity. I saw the true nature of its peace, the cost of its serenity. It was not a collective dream born of desperation, as Elias had originally hinted. No. It was a controlled experiment, a meticulously crafted illusion, maintained by the secret ones to prepare a portion of humanity for a harmonious integration into a purified Eden. The ether weavers were not just projections of the town's will. They were Eden's extensions, guided by the secret ones, gently harvesting the pure consciousnesses of those who were ready to be integrated, to become part of the new Eden. And Port Serenity was merely a nursery. My parents, their placid smiles, their insistence on the tradition, they were not evil. They were simply deeply integrated, blissfully unaware pawns in a cosmic game. The Mister. Seals I saw taken, the Prestons, they were not victims of sacrifice, but willing, albeit unconscious, participants in an ascension. But I, Walter Mills, I could not forget. I could not sleep. I was a discordant note in their symphony of serenity. And now, on this New Year's Eve, the knowledge of what I truly faced, what this town truly was, solidified into a chilling certainty. I was not fighting to save them from a monster. I was fighting to wake them up to a truth so unbearable, so existentially terrifying, that their manufactured bliss was a gift beyond measure. My fight was not against a monster, but against a carefully constructed paradise. My victory would not be salvation, but damnation. I was the harbinger of a nightmare far greater than any dream. And I was already dying, the cosmic truths I had absorbed tearing at my own sanity, my body failing. My final act, my last conscious effort, would be to shatter their peace, to bring back the screams, the madness, the true, horrifying reality of Eden's polluted awakening. What was your favorite part of the story? Want more stories like this? Follow for more.